welcome to our panel today. Thank you all for being here. My name is Helen Keller. I'm a student at the Diplomatic Academy, and I have the honor today to be moderating this panel on the return of power politics. Before I introduce you to my panelists, I would like to give you a short overview of why we thought this topic was relevant and why we included it in a panel, in the conference. So I believe that we all are experiencing on a daily basis a noticeable shift of the intensity of global affairs. From the invasion of Ukraine, just in the last few days, the escalations of the conflict between Pakistan and India, but also a general widespread rise of authoritarian leadership. In recent years, the world has witnessed a return of conflict and military aggression of a magnitude that few would have imagined. And this can be seen as a consequence of ongoing erosion of international norms and a growing disillusionment or even dismantlement of multilateral institutions. So against this backdrop, the tools of diplomacy are being tested. And what we would like to discuss today is, can traditional practices of diplomacy, such as dialogue, negotiation, and multilateral understanding, still guide global affairs? Or is there a return of power politics, which marks a new permanent reality and requires a new set of diplomatic tools? So I have the honor today to be discussing this very interesting topic with four very distinguished guests and veterans of international diplomacy and theory. So first of all, welcome Ambassador Thomas Meyer-Harting. With more than 40 years of experience in Austrian and European diplomacy, the ambassador has worked as an ambassador to NATO and the UN Security Council. He was the head of the EU delegation in the External Action Service and in charge of Europe and Central Asian affairs. His latest role was a special representative of the OSCE. Thank you for being here. Next, I would like to welcome Ambassador Miroslav Vlachowski. He's the former Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, appointed in the very crucial period of 2023. He has held several other diplomatic positions, one of them as Slovak ambassador to the UK, and his focus is thus on European affairs, security policy, and transatlantic relations. And he's currently engaged with GlobeSec in Bratislava. Thank you for being here. Next on, I would like to welcome Dr. Nikolaus Rottenberger. He's a Brigadier General and head of the Military Diplomacy Division at the Austrian Ministry of Defense. He has served as defense attaché to several Central European countries, also including Slovakia, and he brings extensive experience in international security from a perspective of Austrian defense policy. And most of all, he's an alumni of our very distinguished academy, so thank you for returning to us. And lastly, I welcome Dr. Harald Edinger, who is a postdoctoral researcher and teaching fellow at this very diplomatic academy. And his field of research lies in security policy and theory, with specific focus on Russian foreign policy and the evolution of its nuclear strategy and force posture. Thank you for joining us. So I'd first like to start with a round of opening questions, followed by more in-depth questions, and then we will also have a question and answer round with the audience, so you can already think of questions that you would like to address. So I have addressed it in my opening statement, and I would like to talk to you about the current events we seem to be experiencing, which could mark a shift in global order and a declining regard to rules and institutions, rules and institutions. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Ambassador Meyer-Harting. From your vantage point in European and multilateral diplomacy, how have you seen these developments? Is there an erosion of international norms that changes the rule-based order? And how has this affected norms that diplomacy used to rely on?
Well, I think I would like to focus on the situation in Europe, because obviously since the end of the Second World War, we have seen many conflicts and many wars across the world and across the globe. But we always thought that the situation, at least in Europe, is special, in particular since the dramatic changes of '89 and '90. And I mean, the Paris Charter described a European continent which is based in particular on core principles such as the inviolability of borders, the respect for national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And here, of course, I mean, and this was in many ways, first of all, challenged, if you may put it in these terms, in the wars in the former Yugoslavia, but this was a situation that the transatlantic community was able to cope with, and then we've seen the dramatic developments, in particular in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, the war of Russia against Ukraine, which in a certain sense began in 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea, which undoubtedly was a major violation of these Paris Charter principles. And we've seen everything that has happened since, and in particular the war of aggression of Russia since February 22. And in this overall context, we believe that we could still rely 100%, at least on the transatlantic partnership. And if I say rely, I mean in the case of Austria, we were sort of covered by these security arrangements without making a full contribution to them, but obviously we also believed that we were under this security umbrella. And now what we've seen in recent months, and in particular since the beginning of the second term of President Trump, is a new kind of language also from Washington. On the one hand, questioning the security guarantees that the United States has granted Europe in the context of NATO over many decades. And then, of course, the language of power as well when it comes to issues such as Greenland or Canada as the 51st state of the United States. You can now, of course, ask yourself whether this is the specific negotiation tactics of a real estate tycoon or whether it is a fundamental change in international relations. I think some questions still remain open in this context, but this is a new environment that we need to face and that we need to cope with. And you will ask later on, I'm sure, whether diplomacy is still relevant in this context. And I have to say that as we seem to, they've renamed all these rooms here, so I'm a little confused, but I understand that this is a room now named after Prince Kaunitz, probably the second most important diplomat in Austrian history, together with his son-in-law Metternich, and he developed a concept of diplomacy in times of power politics. So I think the whole question of whether power politics and diplomacy are disconnected is a little strange if you ask it precisely in this room, but I'm sure that is something that we will get back to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. We will discuss this, as you said, later on more in depth. So now we'll just return to a more broader question again with you, Ambassador Flachowski. The ambassador has addressed a new environment that is also marked by more ambiguous language. From your experience with Slovakian foreign policy in the Central European region, how do you perceive this shift, and how has this been addressed by Slovakia?
I would say that this shift was, in some aspects, expected. When we talk about America, for example, Americans start to talk about 21st century as a Pacific century in 90s, and we should have been aware of that the attention of a potential attention shift from Europe to America. And different presidential administration communicated differently, in a different style, in a different manner. The most recent one communicated unexpectedly blunt and in a very harsh way for most of the Europeans, but some of it should be expected, some of it is not left us unprepared, put it this way. We are living in a very difficult environment. We see the rise of Russian neo-imperialism and Russia as a revisionist power in Europe. Basically, they challenge the international order, they destroy the security arrangements in Europe, and they want to change the borders by force. And it was, we saw it since basically 28, 29, after the famous speech of Vladimir Putin at the Munich conference. We could see the clouds gathering, and then we saw the war in Georgia, later on annexation of Crimea. And I think it's very important that when we speak about the current war in Ukraine, current Russian full-scale aggression in Ukraine, we always have to remind ourselves this war is going on for more than a decade now. It started at least in 2014, and we should think about it in that frame. What is the challenge for Europe now? Well, we were basically told, you are rich, you are grown-ups, you should take better care of yourselves. That's the message from Americans. I don't think that message is it's fair, because Europe security contribution and Europe contribution to the world order is big, and it should not be count only in the terms of defense spending, but anyway, we have to adapt to new realities. And you asked me about the situation of a country like Slovakia. So it's a sort of a paradox that we see the decline of the security order in Europe, and we see the fragmentation of alliances and connections among allies, but the answer from Europe should be more work together, because we have to be realistic when it comes to what is our potential and how to best use it. And in case of country like Slovakia, I think the best answer, because we are not very rich in material resources, our army is not big. So what it left us is to have a good allies and to think strategically and to have a very clear concept where we belong to, and that's the point where I'm very critical of the current Slovak government and the current Slovak Prime Minister. But I would leave it here.
Thank you very much. So, having addressed that this shift is not a very recent one, but that it has gone on for more than a decade now, I would like to address this question, the next question, to Dr. Edinger. Coming from an academic perspective, how can this be described by theory or academic research? Has this been foreseen? Is there a theory or an explanation to why we have come here?
Thank you. I think purely because I have less experience in the trenches of international diplomacy than my fellow speakers, it makes sense. I draw more on my academic, on my book learning to address this question. There's actually there was a prompt in the program. It was the return of power politics statement or question mark. We can talk about that. And then there was also a discussion prompt: the erosion of international norms challenged the very foundation of the rule-based order. There's a bunch of terms in there that my colleagues are endlessly arguing about. Power, of course, the currency of politics has been the essence of international relations always. But also, what are international norms? What are rules? What is a rules-based order? So I kind of want to try in 3 minutes, if that's possible, to address all three, because I think they are connected. Power is the easiest, because power is you want to get somebody else to do something you want them to do, and in some cases they don't want to do. Soft power is you get them to want to do it, right? But that's nuances, I guess. Norms, these are actually, we use these terms so often that we tend to forget what they actually mean. Norms, in the literature, we mean the informal rules. They are established through repetition, through being recognized by states, through legitimacy, and also through peer pressure if states do not adhere to them. And then rules, these are the formal, the codified prescriptions that for behavior on the international stage. that are often backed by institutions, by the UN, by the ICC, and so on. So if you ask the question, has power politics returned? I would say no, because it's never really gone away. If you look at my writing, you will see I have I don't shy away from engaging with realism. Let's say I use it as a tool among others. Structural realism also. So I think they have a point in arguing that there is an underlying structure of power that exists that shapes politics, and that is still there, right? What I think has changed is that there is now that states and leaders feel less of a need to couch their pursuit of the national interest in terms of norms, in terms of adherence to rules. If you will, there's less shame in just saying what you want and going for it. And that, I think, can also create a feedback mechanism. It can embolden other states to pursue similar interests, or pursue their interests in similarly blunt terms. And that leads us to norms. So are they being eroded? I think there's a couple of competing factors that we need to contend with. On the one hand, if we observe international interstate relations and international commerce, there's definitely a great sense of unease and uncertainty because established norms and established patterns of communication and behavior seem to have gone away. On the other hand, we tend to, I think, glorify the past, and we talk about the wonderful 1990s, the rules-based order when it still existed and the world was so much simpler. I wasn't thinking about the international order much in the 90s, but I'm sure the world looked just as messy then as it does now. And norms, I guess that's my main point, and that's what I want to close with. Norms evolve all the time, so it's also difficult to disentangle what is the evolution of norms. It's a natural competition of norms from different states, different regions, and what part of it is erosion of the fabric of the web of norms.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful to sort the concepts of these terms and to give a very challenging to our question in the panel opinion on that. That is very helpful, I think, also to discuss this later on, if this still has been around all the time, realism, and if the norms are still there or have always been very ambiguous and messy as they are now. Dr. Rottenberger, you work in a realm where power is operationalized. So we have heard about that realism has always been there. Maybe that's exactly where military diplomacy is structured in this. So can you put what was said into a perspective of military diplomacy, and maybe first for the amateurs of us, explain what it is? Is it not contradictory to have military?
So military diplomacy, yeah. Well, that's what I'm going to ask, or I'm asked quite often. Yeah, how does it work? The military, a term coined with war, destruction, and diplomacy, a term coined with peaceful negotiations, and it works very well. So I think the military diplomacy, in the way we practice it in Austria, but also our member states in the European Union or in NATO and in several other like-minded countries, the military diplomacy, so to say, plugs well into foreign and security policy of the state, and we give the military expertise. We as defense attachés abroad, or like I'm responsible in Vienna in the military diplomacy division, responsible also for all those accredited defense attachés in Austria, foreign defense attachés. We, so to say, we assemble information, we present Austrian views on developments, but also what's most important, we add an important piece into the overall situation awareness and reporting on a federal level in Austria. So this is, I think, is an essential tool in diplomacy in general, but works very well, let's say, in the Austrian system. to the general question about the situation, and I would like to add, it's hard to be a spoiler in this round, yeah, but because what I can add to my distinguished colleagues here is just add yes, yes, yes. Yeah. But I just want to add, and this is what I think is maybe I'm invited to give probably a military view, a military perspective on international situation, that we're living in an age of polycrisis. So several crises occur at the same time, and they have an effect on each other. So onto the effects, briefly said, I see three effects we so to say experience today, and one can say in the European Union or in Austria we suffer from today. One is the realization effect. We realize that the system is changing, the international system, and it's changing at least for the last 10 years, if not longer. And it, as my distinguished colleague said, from the illegal occupation and later annexation of the Crimean Peninsula till the war February 22, the unprovoked aggression on Ukraine, the Brexit, which brought the European Union into the position to act more cohesive. The Trump administration 1 and 2 and their effects on the world and Europe. The rising power of China and the spreading, so to say, of China, not only in the region but globally. This is the realization effect. Second is the weaponization effect. So in 2023 we had worldwide 213 conflicts worldwide. I think according to SIPRI, the Stockholm Institute on Peace Research. 21 wars. 21 wars on worldwide. A lot of wars are, so to say, neglected. What happens in the Congo Basin or in Central Africa, obviously the public don't care so much about it. We are very much focused on the Ukraine. Weaponization effect, not to forget the arms race in the Indo-Pacific, the arms race also in the Gulf region, now in Europe, increased spendings in armament, and finally, and I come to the end, the illusions effect is that the European Union, so the old world, or the old Europe, as we have been coined by several US hawks, I would say, if I may say so, in a political sense, we had the illusion that these things will go on, and the world will follow our values and principles, both in international affairs, but also in when it comes to the spread of democracy, human rights, and so on. And this illusion effect is something that we think in Europe. We think about probabilities and what should happen and wishful thinking, while other nations or elites think about possibilities and what they can do and change, how they can change the world. That's in a nutshell.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I think I will use your concept of these effects further to deepen my questions and now go deeper into the concrete reactions of states and institutions that can be can be had in these events. As we're speaking about the role of diplomacy as well, I would like to now ask more on a concrete level. Ambassador Flachowski, we have now heard from Dr. Rottenberger about the realization effect. While you all seem to agree that there has been a more honest or more direct expression of national interests, how has Slovakia maybe realized this shift, and maybe also referring to Prime Minister Fico's visit of today in Russia, can you say if there has been a change of strategy and how this fits in with the role of the EU?
Okay. I think the visit of Slovak Prime Minister to Russia, it's a strategic mistake on behalf of Prime Minister, and it's bad for Slovakia because I don't know what he is gaining from it, but certainly nothing for my country. Maybe privately, maybe as a person he has some gains, but it doesn't make any sense for my country, because basically we are losing the trust of our allies, and we are not gaining anything for it. He often argued that he goes there because of the gas. I mean, there is enough gas in Europe. It's a question of price, and it's a question of how much you are willing to pay for your freedom and independence. And he is full of sovereignist rhetorics, but I think this is the least sovereignist act I can imagine. So that's on Prime Minister Fico's level. But what we can see on the European level is that there is fight or discussions. I would rather call it fight and competitions of different forces within Europe. And one of those forces is a strong populist stream, which praise more that they defend more national sovereignty, Europe on the level of nations, less integration, be afraid of federalization and things like that. Many of these arguments are coming from another neighbor of Austria, Hungary. We can hear it for almost a decade from Viktor Orban, but I think it's a false call, because we have to think about Europe not only on the level of states which constitute the European Union, but also on the level of European Union of itself, because the Union is competing on the world stage, and if we will disassemble it, or if we will make it weaker, we will make it weaker on international level, and we will make it weaker as a competitor. What we have to, what in my view we should concentrate it on now, is that we have to be very frank to ourselves. And Europe has enjoyed years of peace and years of things when things aligned in our way. I would put it this way. We had cheap energies from Russia. We had security protection from America, and we had a big market in China. Basically, that were the circumstances under which we operated in the European Union in 1990s, beginning of 2000. All of three have changed, and we had to adapt. That means that we should, in my view, make Europe not disintegrated, but slimmer and with more muscles and more effective. And we have resources for that, but it really needs a lot of political will and a lot of negotiations and a lot of diplomacy.
Thank you. It's encouraging, I guess. Mr. Ambassador Meyer-Harting, maybe you can refer to this with your expertise in EU foreign policy. How would you see the role of the EU given the shift of circumstance as described by the ambassador?
I mean, it's long ago, but I never forget the European Union. It was just starting to be called the European Union's reaction in the early 90s, when they thought they had solved the post-Yugoslav conflict by bringing peace to Slovenia. And the then president of the Foreign Affairs Council, the Foreign Minister of Luxembourg, Jacques Post, said, "The hour of Europe has arrived." We discovered, I think, immediately afterwards that if the hour of Europe had arrived, it was perhaps a short minute. And immediately afterwards, we discovered that the conflict had escalated to a geopolitical level where it could only be solved with the help of the United States. And it's, I mean, these days it's important to remember, when we criticize the United States, that we that we have to thank the United States for our freedom after 1945, and we have to thank them for peace and stability, at least within Europe, afterwards, and in particular also after the post-Yugoslav conflict. Now, the hour of Europe had not arrived, and it still hasn't arrived. I used to work for the Austrian Foreign Minister Alois Mock, who brought Austria into the European Union, and who always said, if the European Union is not able to export stability, it will import instability. And we've still not solved that problem. I mean, the biggest challenge now is that, frankly, we have a far greater share that we have to bear with regard to not only stabilizing the Balkans, which we still haven't done, because the enlargement to the Balkans is still an open issue, although we promised these countries a European perspective in 2003. We now see that we will have to shoulder the greater part of stabilizing Eastern Europe, the Republic of Moldova, Ukraine in particular. And if Ukraine is forced to make territorial concessions, the issue of stabilizing the democratically led Ukraine, the part of Ukraine that remains under the authority of its legitimate government within the European Union, will remain a major challenge. And we still don't have these answers. And I mean, obviously, peace is a great ideal. Pope Leo XIV spoke yesterday very movingly, I have to say, of what he called unarmed and disarming peace. But I mean, obviously, this is the Christian ideal, but for the European Union and for society in general, to guarantee that ideal, of course, our own societies have to be more armed than they have been in the past. And this is a lengthy process, because obviously, if we need to take over parts of our security that were taken care of by the United States until now, it can't happen from one day to the next. And it's obvious that we cannot do it the way some think right now. And by the way, because the minister mentioned Brexit, I mean, we've suddenly discovered how important the United Kingdom remains to the security of the European continent. Absolutely. And one of the biggest, although they tend to call the rest of us continent, but they're part of the European continent as well. And I mean, it's obvious that the rapprochement that we see between the United Kingdom and the European Union right now is essential. Mm-hmm. And we're also waiting, of course, to see how the security policy of Germany develops, because Germany has been the major economic leader in the European Union, but it was never willing, and to a certain extent not able, to play the equivalent role when it comes to security. So these are all things that we are waiting for, and while we're waiting for these things and need to do these things, and by the way, Austria, a much bigger contribution, as I already said, than it used to do in these matters, because simply to rely, if this becomes a European challenge, obviously the demands towards Austria will be greater than they were in the broader transatlantic context. But these are many things that we still need to do, and we don't exactly know how to get them done in the time, the limited time that we have. And during this complicated period, we also have to maintain reasonable relations with the United States, because we simply cannot, we need them. And therefore, I mean, when we speak later on about continuing diplomacy in such a situation, the efforts that people are making to maintain, under very difficult circumstances, positive relations with the President of the United States, I think that's the core of diplomacy that we're seeing right now.
Thank you very much. We will indeed speak about the role of diplomacy. But given what you just said, I think it's interesting to hear your perspective, Dr. Rottenberger. The ambassador just said that Austria will have to play a bigger role in this European pursuit of exporting stability, but that we might need to be more armed, although how could this be done with military diplomacy? What role can be played by the stretch of both perspectives?
Yeah, what I see the changes concerning especially European security and the European Union is this dramatic shift since 2022, and I think especially with von der Leyen Commission 2, which demonstrates a strong will to engage in security and defense issues more than before. There's the need, there's a clear need also to change the structures. We see with Callas as High Representative, Kibilius as First Commissioner for Defense and Space. We never had this before in the European Union. A clear a clear statement to, well, it said rearm Europe or building defense capacities in Europe. This is unseen before in the history. I mean, since the 1970s, we have a political cooperation, a deepening political cooperation in the European communities, and to where we are today, where we see now currently, got the feeling we get this shift that this goes a bit into the pillar of the common market, or what we see about defense capability building. And this measures infrastructure funds established to rebuild necessary critical and defense infrastructure, including railway, bridges, airways, and in Europe. There's a lot of things going on at the moment. The aim should be, and I think following very much Ambassador Meyer-Harting's path, the transatlantic relation is crucial for European security and defense. The difficulty with the current situation in NATO shall us not forget that there is no European defense or EU defense without NATO. And if you think that most of EU member states countries are NATO countries, and they have only one armed forces, yeah, there will not be at the moment, I do not foresee any European army, which is not NATO. They're deeply integrated. NATO is about standardization, working together, collaboration, joint operations, joint command control, intelligence, cooperation in many, many layers, in many, many ways. Through the Partnership for Peace, for example, we as a neutral country, clearly military neutral country, we are interested in learning these standards and working closely together with NATO. But, bluntly speaking, there will be no defense of Europe without NATO. It's clear. But the question is strategic autonomy. Is Europe willing to invest more and work jointly in deterrence and resilience, building up resilience. And resilience includes actually everybody here in the room. So there's this broad understanding that we are in a very difficult situation in Europe, a situation we haven't seen since 35 years, at least, that this needs, so to say, so including society or broader parts of society in the dialogue about securitization of Europe.
Good, thank you. Okay, so you were referring to a closer cooperation, especially in transatlantic relations. Maybe I would like now to really go into the question, which role can be played by diplomacy then when it comes to this? Professor Dr. Edinger, with regard to the situation that we were addressing, that national interests are being represented more bluntly, how is it possible to rebuild a shared foundation for global cooperation, such as, or to strengthen it again? What are factors that are positively influencing that?
I'll get to that in a second. I just want to say one more thing about following up on a lot of what's been said, and again connecting the norms to the rules to the order, and why it is so hard nowadays to figure out what's going on in this causal chain and whether there is a relationship. I think what we haven't mentioned yet is that norms are also, that's the cynical view, norms are also sometimes weaponized and they are used by the powerful. They're used selectively to bolster their standing, their power, and that has created, of course, a sense of hypocrisy among chiefly non-Western states. Vladimir Putin once called the term rules-based international order an outgrowth of colonialism or manifestation of colonialism, essentially. It's a way to fortify Western hegemony. And so now the last 5 months, we've been in a situation where the former hegemon it looks like is actively dismantling the order that he has built. Although the tone, if you listen to J.D. Vance, which I don't recommend ever, but it's already, some of these things are being walked back already, so we'll have to see what sticks. But yeah, I think there is a broader dynamic where, because we ask in this panel, so what's the order, what's happening to it, where are we going to end up with our international order? I think we also have to get comfortable with the idea that maybe we won't have one, and it will be a pluralistic system where different regions, clusters of states operate under different logics. And I think that leads me to, I guess, lessons for diplomacy. This is not my specialty, so I can only go from what I feel like the structure of international politics calls for, and it's like I said, it's this contest for whose norms are going to dominate. I think we should also be a bit more proactive and a bit more self-confident in defending what we feel like are the right norms. And diplomacy, it has this weird public image sometimes as the art of saying nothing, or just having nice cocktail parties when everything else is going well and there's no conflict. That's absolutely not what it's there for. It's managing. It's basically warfare in suits, right? It's not warfare, but conflict, right? It's finding out red lines, finding common ground, hashing out differences. And I think this sort of adaptive diplomacy is what's called for, and also I hope that this age of moral diplomacy is over, the proselytizing, the missionary kind of diplomacy, and also a kind of pursuit of multilateralism for its own sake. This notion that I will not talk to you about this one issue because I disagree with you on the other issue. I think that also has to go away in a more multipolar, pluralistic world.
Thank you. So you were already addressing the traditional tools of diplomacy, as you said, are conflict in suits. Besta Meyer-Harting, what do you see? What do you think about traditional strategies of diplomacy? Do they need adaptation? Are they more relevant than ever? What's your
first of all, there's a famous quote by Frederick of Prussia, whom they call the Great, as we say in Austria, who said that a diplomacy without arms is like an orchestra without instruments. So, I mean, obviously there has to be a combination of both instruments. If diplomacy doesn't have the possibility to back up at least those of big powers, I'm not speaking now of sort of medium-sized and small countries, big powers, to back up what they want with some kind of military structure, it won't take them particularly far. And now, because I mentioned at the very beginning Kaunitz, who was famous for his policy of renversement des alliances, he at one point decided that, I mean, it was in the interest of his country simply to change all alliances. That's one form of diplomacy. And there's another equally famous quote by the British Prime Minister Palmerston, who said that you don't have eternal friends and you don't have perpetual enemies. The only thing that is eternal and perpetual are your interests. So that is sort of a specific kind of diplomacy based on, well, very pragmatic defense of your national interests. I have to say that the European Union has not been built on that kind of diplomacy. The European Union has always based what it is doing on some core principles, on the principle of a rule-based order, on the principle of effective multilateralism, and by the way, the Treaty on European Union says that at the core of this effective multilateralism, you have the United Nations, with the core role for the Security Council. So the European Union can, in my opinion, not go through a policy of renversement des alliances. And not only because, as the General rightly said, we cannot say no to NATO, for the foreseeable future. We need these structures, and obviously, but we have to cope with the problem that our closest ally that on the one hand, in Europe, we are faced with a revisionist power, as the minister said, and on the other hand, our closest ally is unpredictable, to put it very mildly. Clearly, I mean, this is a situation that we have to deal with. I mean, we can always hope for changes in American politics, which may perhaps make transatlantic cooperation more reliable and more stable in the future again. But in the meantime, we have to build our own capacities. We have to seek new partners. I mean, obviously, we cannot throw away the alliances and partnerships we have, but it is clear that Austria, Europe as a whole, has probably not done enough with cultivating rising powers. I mean, India is an obvious case. China remains a major challenge. I mean, the Chinese ambassador to Austria said recently in an interview, we have lived for 5,000 years without the United States, so this for us is a new situation. So obviously, I mean, these are, I mean, China, but also, I mean, the global South, Africa, which has for many ways historical partnership with Europe, which is also based on European responsibilities that need to be assumed. So these are things that we need to continue to do, while at the same time continuing to cultivate our partnership with a very difficult partner on the other side of the Atlantic. And obviously this requires diplomacy. And I will end with giving you one practical example. I mean, when the United States came up with their resolution on Ukraine, which was originally supported in the United Nations Security Council by everybody except the 5 European members of the Security Council. There was a serious discussion whether the United Kingdom and France should exercise their right of veto against that proposal by the United States. And it's worth noting that the last time the United Kingdom and France have exercised their right of veto was, I think, in 1989 or something like that. So it would have been a really massive signal towards the United States. But obviously this was exactly at the moment when both the Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron were desperately trying to keep President Trump on board with regard to Ukraine. So obviously it would not have been a particularly intelligent idea to exercise one's right of veto in the United States. And that is a very modest example of what diplomacy continues to be in these difficult times.
Thank you. With regard to our time, we're running out of it, unfortunately. I would like you to give you the chance to answer to some of the questions from our audience, if that's okay for you. Yeah. So we would like to take now questions.
Go. Yeah, go. All right. Thank you very much, dear speakers. Helen, for the wonderful discussion, for the panel. I'd like to shortly ask, is it time maybe to abandon the consensus diplomacy in Europe and rely more maybe on the coalitions of the willing on some major issues on the international agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe there. Please, if you can introduce yourself and before you ask your question.
Thank you very much for the interesting insights and ideas. I come from a country, which you probably all really realized by my accent, that was unfortunately responsible for Brexit, but I'm very happy that people are now moving back towards Europe. You know? But what I wanted to say was that I'm very skeptical that power can be combated by diplomacy. There are certain people, dictators, who are not particularly interested, I don't think, in diplomacy. And we seem at a complete loss of how to deal with people. Did people, for example, try diplomacy with Stalin? Did we manage to stop Hitler? Did we manage to stop Putin in 2014 with the annexation? So does diplomacy always work, or is there a point at which we have to say diplomacy has reached its limits and we don't know quite how to deal with dictators? I wouldn't necessarily call Trump a dictator, but part of his power is his unpredictability. He changes his mind every 2 days, and the rest of the world, or at least Europe, jumps. So my question remains, is it possible to use diplomacy in every situation? Thank you.
Thank you. One more, maybe, given time constraints? Yes, here.
Hi, I might actually have a question for Ambassador Meyer-Harting. So you said that diplomacy needs arms or needs armies as a to push for its agenda and to make it worthwhile or to make it last and effective. But I wonder to what extent that is just this deterrence idea, that deterrence will somehow make sure that your interests are protected, because does that not undermine the genuine diplomacy that is built on trust and good relations when you basically have a knife under the table ready for the biggest one to strike? And also, at the same time, when we see that arms and conflict are always hurting the people on the planet, is it not the meaning of diplomacy, the essence of states, to protect the interests of its citizens, of the people, of the planet as a whole? And if we do use deterrence and weapons as a means to get our own interests, aren't the interests actually those of the people, and wouldn't that actually harm them? Thank you.
So I would first like to give you the chance of responding, Mr. Flachowski, to the question maybe if power can still be combated by diplomacy, or if it has reached its limits.
Well, I think it's a very special jiu-jitsu between diplomacy and military power and dictators, but I don't think that diplomacy is necessarily weak in facing dictators, because how many dictators ended by powerful alliances and creation of allies? When you think about Napoleon starting and others, it all end up with some kind of alliances against the challenger, against the dictator, against the guy who challenged the international order. But as it was already said, the diplomacy works best when it can use the power, when actually it's supported by strengths. And I always remember the Dayton Accords. And Richard Holbrooke, it was diplomacy with running bomber jet engines. Mm-hmm. And that's why it was respected by Milosevic, and actually it ended with something which should have been a provisional arrangement, but we live, unfortunately, with that provision until these days. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that diplomacy is necessarily weak. Unfortunately, it's much slower. It's much slower than and it's always like that. It seems that Democrats are weaker, that diplomacy is slower, but at the end, the results are not that bad, I would say.
Yeah.
If I may add, yeah, the question, referring to your question, in the European Union, should we sort of shift from consensus diplomacy to coalition of the willing? Well. One thing is question of decision making in the European Union, yeah, and this seems sometimes the picture is a bit blurred from the outside. As a matter of fact, and this is also regarding to the general question of the use of diplomacy, is that I think this diplomacy, as I from a military diplomatic position or from a military standpoint looks on diplomacy. It runs on several layers, on several levels, on different tracks. We have first, second, third track diplomacy. I think those who are students of diplomacy know that diplomacy is a rich toolbox, a very rich toolbox. And military diplomacy, for example, that you have on expert level talks, yeah, is one of them. Yeah, it's one of a very useful one. Yeah? So. The one is about decision making, and in other ways we at least in the European field as a consensus is one issue in diplomacy. It's not necessary in the decision-making of the European Union. It depends on what we decide on or shall decide on. In some things in the military, in the area of common foreign security policy and common defense policy, we have, for example, the permanent structured cooperation, field of permanent structured cooperation between European armies. There we have the coalition of the willing, you may say. So those who want to proceed, they proceed. Those who are not willing to proceed, they abstain, and they do not block the others to proceed. So that's working. It's working very well. And shall I add to the crisis of diplomacy, or
yes.
if I may quickly? Referring to your questions, I think also I very much are in favor of Ambassador Meyer-Harting's approach. To combine different tools in foreign policy and security and defense policy, to combine them, shape a strategy that you can use, and I quote Barry Busan. I think Joseph S. Knight just passed away last week, if I'm not mistaken. A very sadden moment for the political scientist community and international relational theories. Soft power was one of his main paradigms, and but I want to shift from him to Barry Busan, constructivist, smart power, so combining hard power and soft power. And I see both in soft power, which is a very broad and more into what we call peacemaking on the UN system, peace building in the UN system. To hard power, the combination, and the bridge is diplomacy in many ways, in many factors. So I do think it is able, diplomacy is a very powerful tool, and is able to isolate dictators or dictatorship, isolate them, and then in one or the other way have a changing effect on such political systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this refers directly to the question that was asked to you, Mr.
Well, first of all, if you don't mind, if there's 1 minute, I would like to answer the question whether one has ever negotiated with dictators. I mean, obviously Hitler is a particularly good example, because Chamberlain, as I don't have to remind you, tried to do it. I mean, the big mistake was to say that he had ensured peace for our time, because that was clearly an illusion. And obviously with Stalin, people also negotiated, and Churchill thought he had come to an arrangement regarding all the countries of Eastern Europe with these percentage division of powers, which never worked out that way. The point is that you sometimes can't avoid negotiating with dictators, at least because you have to gain time. And I know that, for instance, the Minsk agreements have been heavily criticized, in particular by the Ukrainians themselves after 2014. But with hindsight, these years of, well, you can't call it peace, but these years of some sort of ceasefire and accalmement of the situation at least made it possible for the Ukrainians to make themselves resilient in a manner that nobody expected. I mean, even the United States, as you know, never thought that the Ukrainians would be able to defend themselves the way they've done for the last 3 years, and offered Zelensky a lift instead of providing him arms at the beginning. So that's the first thing. The second thing about your question, I mean, there's another, I've been giving you all sorts of quotes today, but there's another famous quote by Theodore Roosevelt, who described diplomacy as speaking softly and carrying a big stick. That was not the kind of diplomacy that I was referring to. I mean, that's the kind of diplomacy that the United States has used very effectively, in particular in the southern part of the American continent over many decades. But I do think that at least to pursue your own interests, you have to have the capacity that you exactly described as deterrence. I mean, if you're not able to make a credible signal that if others try to push you over, it won't work, then diplomacy won't work either. I mean, the real distinction is between sort of aggressive and defensive use of force. And I think the European Union, frankly, is not trying to accumulate military force to develop an imperialist policy across the world, but I mean to be sufficiently credible to defend its own interests against pressure from outside, and these days potentially even from allies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a perfect ending to our panel. Thank you very much for being here. I think we heard a lot about how diplomacy has not at all lost its relevance, but has to actually instead work effectively and credibly, as you just said, with military means, and precisely to prevent the use of force in the future. So thank you very much for giving us these insights and for being with us.
Thank you.
So before we go into the lunch break, I'm having a video with me for giving you some food for thought and giving you some outlook on our afternoon panels. It's from Ambassador, oh sorry, this is not good. Patricia Espinosa from Mexico, and yeah.
Can diplomacy save the world? That is indeed a bold question. It may seem naive to some, a sign of youthful confidence, an instance of wishful thinking. It is none of those things. On the contrary, it is a timely question that helps us focus on what really matters. My congratulations to the Vienna Diplomatic Academy Students' Initiative Conference for their audacity in inviting us to reflect on some of the most pressing issues of our time. The global menace posed by this place of power that seeks submission rather than conciliation. The disruptive effects of technological innovations that go beyond anything seen before. The mounting difficulties faced by multilateral institutions as they strive to live up to their hopes and expectations. Above all, the climate crisis as the ultimate test for humanity's ability to put cooperation and long-term common good ahead of competition and short-term private gain. There are few places better suited than Vienna to reflect on those challenges. The Austrian capital has been at the heart of previous crises and wisely keeps alive their memory, especially those unleashed by an aggressive power or exacerbated by failing international institutions. Vienna also suffers the impacts of technologies that radically change the way we live, work, or travel, and it is increasingly exposed to the impacts of climate change, whose ultimate reach we are unable to predict, even if we are the only ones with the capacity to hold it back. I was a diplomat for almost 4 decades, and I have been a firm believer in multilateralism from the time I started my career as a diplomatic attaché at the age of 23, and throughout the time I served as an ambassador in different countries, one of them Austria, or as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, and even more so during my time at the head of UN climate change. Over the years, my commitment to the values and principles enshrined in the UN Charter has only increased. And this commitment, like your question about diplomacy's capacity to save the world, is not naive or merely hopeful. It is a result of 2 simple and, in my view, incontrovertible facts. First, that certain challenges cannot be solved in isolation and need to be addressed through evidence-based discussion, straightforward negotiation, and constructive cooperation. Second, that such cooperation is only possible when we show basic respect towards each other. The 3 elements I have mentioned, discussion, negotiation, and cooperation, form the basis of all collective action, and they are our best hope to overcome the greatest threat ever faced by humanity, the climate crisis. But they ultimately depend on one of the most basic principles of any community, mutual respect among its members. So my response to your question is simply this. Diplomacy alone cannot save the world, but the world will not be saved without diplomacy. I hope that your discussions increase your understanding, strengthens your confidence, and keeps you focused on those challenges that can only be solved by respectfully working together and not against each other. Thank you.